Barbarians. They get very angry and they hit very hard. And today we're going to be making not just one barbarian, not just two, but three barbarians in D&D to see how the new 2024 Player's Handbook stacks up against the old 2014 rules. Why three? Well, there are a number of reasons. One, the barbarian is quite a simple class by its nature. We don't have a lot of spells or magical abilities to worry about here, and so this should go quite quickly. Two, the barbarian's been through a lot of changes between editions, and so I really want to do it justice by exploring it through the lens of multiple subclasses. And three, well, honestly, there are a lot of barbarians in fantasy fiction, and I couldn't choose which to make. I mean, like the fighter or the thief or the wizard before them, this half-naked, muscle-bound barbarian is one of those tropes of fantasy fiction which shows up time after time in multiple books and movies, finding its roots way back in old-school pre-Tolkien sword and sorcery fantasy of the early 20th century. And if we're talking sword and sorcery fantasy of the early 20th century, we are of course going to be looking at the two pillars of that genre, Edgar Rice Burroughs with his Tarzan series and Robert E. Howard with his Conan the Barbarian books. And just to throw in a more recent example as well, just to show they do still show up, we're going to be also looking at Joe Abercrombie's incredible The First Law trilogy and his main character, Logen Ninefingers. Because say one thing for Logen Ninefingers, say he makes for a really great barbarian. Now each of these three will start at a very similar point, because we're going to be creating all three of them in D&D Beyond using no legacy content and with homebrew turned off. All three of them are humans, all three of them are going to be level 9, all three of them are going to use point buy to determine their stats. Otherwise, when building them, I am going to try to adhere as closely to their fictional roots as possible. I am not looking to min-max here, but rather to accurately portray the character in the game of D&D. Now, as barbarians, all three of these characters get the same basic barbarian features, so let's look at those quickly. So they all get the rage feature out of the gate, which is the core mechanic of the class that allows them as a bonus action to channel their inner strength to boost their offensive output and make them resistant to non-magical damage. They all get unarmored defense, which boosts their AC when they're not wearing armor, which is good because most of these guys seem to be allergic to clothes. They get reckless attack, which lets them roll their attacks with advantage, in exchange for which enemies can roll with advantage against them. They get danger sense, that gives them advantage against dexterity saving throws. They get an extra attack, which gives them an extra attack, and they get fast movement that gives them 10 feet of extra movement per turn, provided they aren't wearing armor. So far, so very 2014, because all of these features existed both in the old edition of the game, and they still exist pretty much the same way in the 2024 version, which is good, because this is a really solid set of core features here. They all synergize really well together, they build on the strengths of the other, and they're all adding to that overall impression that, hey, this is a barbarian, you hit hard, and in exchange you too are hit hard, but it doesn't matter because you're resistant to non-magical damage and you get more hit points than anyone else. New to the 2024 version, however, is the fact that, just like most melee classes, you now get weapon masteries, which allows you to inflict additional effects such as cleave, graze, or vex when making attack rolls. Situationally useful perhaps, but definitely fun and flavorful as a mechanic when you can pull it off. The Barbarian now also gets Feral Instinct and Instinctive Pounce at level 7, which allows Barbarians to roll initiative with advantage and to move up to half their speed when entering a rage, potentially making Barbarian now one of the most mobile classes in the game. They also get Brutal Strike at level 9, which allows you to forego the advantage that you would receive from a reckless attack in order to deal additional damage and additional effects. Honestly, no notes. These are all really great features which gel seamlessly with the pre-existing features in the game, so seamlessly in fact I had to triple check to make sure that they didn't already exist in that version of the game. These new abilities, by the way, replaced the old, now outdated versions in 2014 of Brutal Critical, which allowed you to roll an additional dice when scoring a critical hit, which, yeah, I'm not surprised they changed that. That's a bit of a clunky feature anyway, since the rules for critical hits mean you're meant to be doubling all dice when resolving damage, so Here, this feature gives me an additional dice. Does that dice get doubled as well? Unclear. And Feral Instinct is the other feature that has been overwritten, which in addition to giving advantage on initiative rolls, same as now, means that you cannot be surprised in combat provided that you enter a rage on your very first turn, which is situational at best. Honestly, it's a good thing they changed this one. I'm sure it was just leading to a lot of headaches for DMs. So that's how our 3 barbarians are the same, but how do they differ? Well, let's start with Tarzan, the wild man himself. Orphaned while still a baby deep inside the jungle, Tarzan was raised by apes and grew up a feral child. He talks to animals, he's nimble, he's fast, he's strong, he's more than capable of holding his own in a fight. And out the gate, we get to choose 2 proficiencies for Tarzan. Honestly, any of these could apply here, but we're going to go with athletics and animal handling. I mean, if Tarzan can't handle animals, no one can, right? For weapon mastery, he's all about fists and wrestling, so I'm going to choose Great Club and Club. I mean, he's hitting with tree branches, you know. Feats, well, as a variant human, he gets to pick one, and we're going to go with Tavern Brawler. As I said, he's all about fighting up close and personal, and this allows him to use improvised weapons and makes his fists hit with D4s. At level 4, we're going to be taking Speedy, which boosts Tarzan's speed and makes him ignore difficult terrain. Feels appropriate. And at level 8, we're going to go with the old faithful Skill Expert. For you see, although these days most people know Tarzan from the Disney movie of the same name, which I'm showing on screen now, the original book version of Tarzan was notable for being very different. In fact, I would say the book version of Tarzan is a borderline genius. There's no broken me Tarzan, you Jane here. As originally depicted, Tarzan speaks English just fine. I mean, not only that, he taught himself to read from his father's books. And thanks to these books, he's actually fully aware of world history and his family tree long before he's discovered by quote-unquote civilization. He can communicate with many species of animals, he's a skillful tracker, he's a talented impressionist, he's shown to be capable of learning new languages in literally days. And so we're going to be taking extra proficiencies where we can here. So Variant Human gives him history, and this skilled feat here gives him an expertise in acrobatics because, I mean, come on now, of course he's skilled in acrobatics. For background, well, I hesitated over this for a little while because there isn't really one that fits, but in the end I went with Hermit, which gives him the healer feat and proficiency in medicine and herbalist skills. That feels about right. And after applying point buy to everything, we are left with these stats. Now, if we run the exact same build through the 2014 version of the rules, taking the exact same choices, we see that we end up with this spread at the end. Slightly more optimized in 2014, it has to be said. He hits harder at the very least, but all in all, there's not a lot here to note beyond the usual fact that the 2014 version just has more options. Finally, subclass, and it shouldn't be a surprise to hear that we're going with Wildheart here, the animal-themed subclass, which allows Tarzan to put into play certain effects every time he rages. Bear, for example, gives him resistance to most damage types, and Eagle lets him move around without invoking opportunity attacks. And we're going to choose Eagle for that very reason. He's quite a mobile guy. At level 8, we also get to choose an additional effect here, so we're going to go with Panther, which gives Tarzan a climbing speed equal to his walking speed. Makes sense to me. And this, in fact, does represent the biggest change between this version of Tarzan and his 2014 counterpart, because in 2014, Tarzan can only choose one animal bonus to give himself, and he can't change this choice very easily. At level 8 also, these choices are completely different. Rather than Panther, we're going to have to choose here Eagle to give Tarzan vision up to a mile away and excellent sight even in dim lighting conditions. Not that this comes up very often in most D&D campaigns. Again, you can't really change this choice once made, unlike in the 2024 version, which you can make the change every time you long rest. So there we have it, Tarzan in D&D, and I have to say, yeah, he feels good. Extremely mobile, dexterous, friend to all animals. He would absolutely have no problem performing on the battlefield almost exactly the way that he appears in his fictional outings. And although there's not a lot here to distinguish between the two versions, I have to say overall the 2024 version gets my seal of approval simply because of the greater flexibility it gives me in choosing which animal totem I want to utilise, allowing me to adapt my approach to suit the current game situation. Flexibility in D&D, always a good thing. Ready for round 2? Well, here is Conan. Orphaned as a child when a band of raiders led by a cult leader massacred his village, Conan is taken into slavery to work at a large mill, the Wheel of Pain, and apparently pushing this wheel for years on end made Conan very strong because he then manages to earn his freedom by becoming an expert in gladiatorial combat before teaming up with a thief, a wizard and a fellow fighter, a genuine D&D group right here, to take on the snake cult and enact revenge against the man that killed his parents. If it's not clear, by the way, I haven't actually read the books for Conan. I'm basing this entirely off the film version of the character. So proficiencies, we're going to go with athletics and survival. I mean, he is very good at surviving. Look, he survives literal crucifixion and death at one point. For weapon mastery, we're going to go with longsword and great axe, which he uses both in the movie. And for feats, we're going to go with skulker, because he's very good at sneaking around. I mean, look at that camouflage. Hey, whew, that's good. And mage slayer, because he's all about defeating that wizard. He's also going to get savage attacker, no reason necessary. Finally, for background, we're going to go with entertainer, because as a gladiator, that's exactly what he was. He entertained people. Unfortunately, there's no background in the base game for gladiator, and this is a shame because the WotC interpretation of an entertainer seems to definitely be leaning hard on the music side of things. So apparently Conan is really talented at musical instruments now. Doesn't feel very fitting to his character, and honestly, if I were running this in a campaign, I'd probably ask my DM if I could just make my own custom background for this one, choosing something much closer to the soldier or the guard background. But after applying point buy to his stats here, this is the spread that we're left with, and comparing this with the 2014 version, with the exact same choices made at every step, we find ourselves with quite a big difference here, because thanks to the way that feats now work in the new edition, in that most of them are now half feats, we find that the old version of Conan, well, he has a lower wisdom score, and crucially, he has a lower dexterity score, which, thanks to unarmored defense, means he also has a lower AC as well. Definitely the weaker version there. Finally, subclass, and Conan here is going to be following the path of the Zealot. He is a follower of Crom, who is the chief god of the Sumerian pantheon that lives on the Great Mountain. Now, Conan professes multiple times in the stories not to be a big believer in Crom. After all, it is apparently, in the books, considered useless to call upon Crom in battle because he is this savage god that hates weaklings and hates people asking him for help. But despite this, Conan does call upon him for help several times. Crom is quite literally the first word that Conan utters in the movie, and Crom in turn does give Conan courage and strength to succeed in battle, and even at one point in the movie, divine intervention to protect him. As a zealot, Conan gets 3 core features by level 9. He gets Divine Fury, which in both versions lets Conan add an additional d6 plus his barbarian level rounded down in radiant or necrotic damage to his attack rolls while raging. He gets Fanatical Focus, which allows Conan to re-roll a saving throw once per turn while raging, and he gets Warrior of the Gods, which is very different. So in 2014, this feature allowed Conan to be revivified without requiring the use of material components. That's 50 gold pieces of diamonds saved right there. Not too shabby, though extremely situational in practice. But in 2024, however, this feature instead gives you a pool of D4 dice, which you can roll as a bonus action on your turn to heal back hit points. It's kind of like an improved version of the fighter's second wind feature, and honestly would be much more useful in the vast majority of combat situations. So we can safely say here, the 2024 version of Conan is better too. Is it going to be 3 for 3 here? Well, yeah, it is. I'm not going to beat around the bush here. Logen Ninefingers is a berserker through and through, and berserker, honestly, is probably the most improved subclass in the entire game. So, Logen Ninefingers is an interesting one. Most of the time in the books, his character comes across as this world-weary and battle-scarred character. But during battle, Logen loses himself. He transforms into this feared character of the Bloody Nine, this terror of the North, who, it turns out, is pretty much solely responsible for the mess of the Northern Kingdoms at the start of the first book. During this state, he becomes unable to distinguish friend from foe, he doesn't feel pain, and he gets nothing but sheer joy from the act of killing. When he's not in battle, however, Logen, during his sober moments, doesn't seem to really know where this bloody side of himself comes from. Apparently he killed his own father, that was the first time it ever happened. But Logen usually is this kind of wise, thoughtful person. He's merciful to his enemies. In fact, the crew that he travels around with, they're made up almost entirely by former enemies of his, whom he faced in one-on-one combat at some point, and then spared at the moment of death, which then, due to the honor of the North, it forces them to swear their lives to him, since he is the reason that they still live. And during the books, we see that he is a really nice guy, genuinely. Like, to Giselle, who later becomes the king in the novels, spoiler alert, he comes across almost like a mentor or a big brother. To Pharaoh, this wild ex-slave, he's this understanding shoulder to cry on. To Beaz, the wizard, he's this useful tool in his evil machinations. And to most of the rest of the world, he's this absolute menace and scourge. Very odd character, to say the least, and this is going to be reflected in his build. So proficiencies, we're going to go with athletics and intimidation. For weapon mastery, we're going with longsword and greatsword. For feats, we have tough, great weapon master, and savage attacker as its origin feat. His background is soldier. And for his human starting feat, we're going to go with magic initiate druid, which might seem a little bit out of left field, but it's because of a feature of Logen's character that I haven't mentioned yet, because uniquely in the world of the First Law trilogy, and by the way, I'm just going to take a break here just to say, if you haven't read these books yet, you really should. This is an incredible fantasy series of books. I particularly recommend The Heroes, although Logen doesn't actually appear in that book, but I gotta say, that right there is a top 5 fantasy novel for me right there. I even met Joe Abercrombie once. He's a really top guy, really great dude. Give him the book sale. What you got to lose? But anyway, Logen has the ability to see and to speak with spirits. This isn't an ability that we see anyone else in the series really do, and it's not clear where exactly Logen gets this ability from, but hey, he can do it. He can talk with ghosts, apparently, and this does prove very useful during the course of the novels. So to replicate this in-game, we're going to be taking here Magic Initiate, and we're going to be choosing as his cantrips Guidance and Mending. They are the least magical options we have, and, you know, he mentors Giselle. That can be interpreted as guidance, right? And for his spell choice, we're going to go with Speaks with Animals. And if I were playing this character, I would ask my DM at the outset if we could instead change the naming of this spell to make it Speaks with Spirits instead, and otherwise have it behave in exactly the same way as Speak with Animals, but just it works with creatures of the undead creature variety rather than beasts. Makes sense to me, anyway. But yeah, after building this exact same thing in 2014 and 2024 using the exact same choices, you can see that once again that the 2024 version is the better play here with higher charisma and better dexterity. As for subclass, well, I already said he's a berserker, and this is going to be an interesting one to look at because, like I said, berserker is probably one of the worst subclasses, mechanically speaking, in the old version of the game, thanks to its core mechanics utilizing exhaustion as a feature. Now, in 2014, the Frenzy ability meant that you could make an additional attack roll using your bonus action each turn while raging, in exchange for which you take a point of exhaustion once the battle is over. In 2024, however, this feature is 1,000 times better, because now while raging, you deal a number of d6s equal to your rage damage bonus, and you add these to your first successful attack roll each turn. Now that's an incredible damage boost right there, and since it doesn't utilize exhaustion, you're going to feel a lot happier using it. And you couple this with the Savage Attacker feat that we already mentioned, you're going to be making some really big rolls out there. Otherwise, both versions of the character are the same. They give you immunity to the charmed or frightened condition while raging, and yeah, that totally tracks with his character. So overall, I have to say the 2024 version is, as expected, substantially better than 2014. It's not even close, really. And so overall, with all three of these subclasses, with all three of these characters taken into consideration, where do I put the Barbarian on this scale of power compared with the 2014 version? Honestly, it goes right up here, because in every single way, from pure damage output to versatility to core mechanics, the 2024 version of Barbarian is substantially better than the 2014 version, taking everything that worked from that old edition, ditching the things that were a bit clunky or poorly written, and putting in its place substantially better class features that gel seamlessly with what was already there. Honestly, pound for pound, I think Barbarian may actually be the most improved class in the entire game between editions. But what do you think? As always, I'm going to be putting links to these character sheets down in the description. Feel free to take a look, try them in your own games if you want to. If you have watched this to the very end, a massive, massive thank you. Honestly, it's thanks to people like you that I keep this channel running. Do share this video, do like it, do subscribe, do comment on it. All of these things, they really go a long way to help. But in the meantime, we're running out of classes. In fact, we only have 2 left to choose from. We have Paladin and Cleric. So this final spin of the wheel is going to determine both of the next videos, starting next week with Paladin. Until then, take care.